Sir, I'm going to have to ask you not to touch the aircraft. Sergeant First Class Brian Cutler said it without looking up from the engine cowling of the 1967 UH-1D Huey, not rudely, just with the flat authority of a man who has been working on a problem for 2.5 hours and does not have the bandwidth for additional variables. He was on his knees on the hangar floor of the Army Aviation Heritage Museum at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Diagnostic tablet propped against the skid, torque wrench on the concrete beside him. The particular frustration of a certified aviation mechanic who cannot find why a historically restored helicopter will not start radiating off him in a way that Specialist Tran, standing 3 feet back, could read from across the hangar. The old man in the canvas field jacket had walked into the bay 8 minutes ago. He had not introduced himself. He had not asked permission. He had stood at the perimeter of the work area, thermos in one hand, and he had listened to the engine being cranked, the starter engaging, the turbine beginning to spool, and then the thing that was not happening correctly, the thing that Cutler had been chasing for 2.5 hours, with the specific quality of attention of a man diagnosing something by ear. He had then walked forward to within 4 feet of the cowling and reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a mechanic's stethoscope, metal probe, long flexible tube, the type used to isolate sounds in running machinery. He held it at his side. He was looking at the engine. "Sir," Cutler said again, I need you to step back." The old man looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at the engine. "I know what's wrong with it," he said. What Sergeant First Class Cutler did not know, could not have known, because the visitor log listed a name and nothing further, and because nothing about the old man in the worn field jacket and the canvas thermos suggested anything other than a retiree on a museum visit, was that Doyle Hester had been a UH-1 crew chief for the first 11 years of his Army career, that he had flown 1,100 hours in UH-1 variants across 2 tours in Vietnam, maintaining and operating the aircraft in conditions that made a hangar in Alabama look like a controlled laboratory, just that he knew the Lycoming T53 turboshaft engine, the power plant sitting 12 inches in front of him, with the specific intimacy of a man who had kept 14 of them alive in the field using tools that fit in a canvas pouch, by sound and feel and the accumulated knowledge of a decade of daily use. And that the sound the engine was making, the specific quality of the incomplete spool, the thing underneath the turbine whine that Cutler's diagnostic tablet was not measuring because it did not know to measure it, was a sound Doyle Hester had heard before, in 1969, in a landing zone in the Ia Drang Valley that was not entirely secure, with men waiting to board and a crew chief who had 45 seconds to get the aircraft flyable or leave it. He had gotten it flyable. He remembered exactly how. Connie, if you believe that some kinds of knowledge live in the hands and not in the manual, type crew chief in the comments right now. Because what Doyle Hester does in the next 4 minutes in that maintenance bay is something that Sergeant First Class Cutler has been trying to explain to people ever since. And the reason he cannot fully explain it is that it cannot be fully explained. It can only be witnessed. His full name was Doyle Ray Hester. He had been born in Cleburne County, Alabama, in the fall of 1948, the second son of a coal miner and a woman who could fix any engine she encountered, because in Cleburne County, if you could not fix it yourself, it stayed broken. Doyle had grown up with his hands in engines, lawn mowers, farm equipment, his father's 1951 Ford pickup that spent as much time on blocks as on the road, and had developed, by the time he was 16, the specific mechanical sensibility that his mother called listening. You did not diagnose an engine by reading about it. You listened to it. You put your hand on it. You felt what it was telling you, and you acted on what it said. He had enlisted in the Army in 1966, at 17, with his mother's signature. He had been assigned, based on mechanical aptitude scores in the 96th percentile, to aviation maintenance, specifically to rotary wing airframes, specifically to the UH-1 Iroquois, which the Army was operating in Vietnam in numbers that required every qualified crew chief it could produce. He had completed his initial training at Fort Rucker in 1967 and had deployed to Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division in early 1968. He had been 19 years old when he first sat in the crew chief's seat of a UH-1 on a combat insertion mission in the Ia Drang Valley. The aircraft had been a D model, olive drab, a machine with 412 flight hours on the airframe and an engine that he had rebuilt twice in the previous 6 weeks. He knew it the way you know something you have rebuilt twice. He knew the sound it made when everything was correct and the sound it made when something was not. He had flown 2 tours, 1968 to 1969, and again from 1970 to 1971, accumulating 1,100 flight hours in UH-1 variants across the 2 deployments. He had kept aircraft flying in field conditions that the maintenance manual did not contemplate and could not address. Jungle humidity, red laterite mud in every component. Parts that had to be fabricated from whatever was available because the supply chain did not reach far enough and the aircraft needed to fly now, not Thursday. The Lycoming T53 turboshaft, the engine in every UH-1 variant from the B through the H model, had been his primary concern across both tours. He knew its failure modes the way a doctor knows the failure modes of the human heart, by having seen them repeatedly under pressure, and by having learned to read the early signs before they became terminal events. A T-53 that was about to have a fuel control problem sounded slightly different from a T-53 that was running correctly. The difference was approximately 30 Hz in the turbine frequency spectrum, not measurable by a standard diagnostic tablet in 1969. Not because the difference wasn't real, but because the tablet wasn't listening for it. A man with a stethoscope and a decade of pattern recognition was. He had come home in 1971. He had finished his Army career in aviation maintenance instruction at Fort Rucker, retiring as Chief Warrant Officer Four in 1993 after 27 years of service. He had taught UH-1 maintenance at Fort Rucker for 8 of those years, producing several hundred mechanics who were better at their jobs because of the specific quality of instruction he provided. Not instruction from the manual, though he taught the manual too, but instruction from the field, from the machine, wanted from the 2 tours and the 1,100 hours and the particular education that comes from keeping aircraft alive when the alternative is men dying. He had retired to a house 6 miles from Fort Rucker in Daleville, Alabama. He had been a widower since 2014. He visited the Heritage Foundation's collection 3 or 4 times a year, not for nostalgia, though there was some of that, but because the aircraft were there, and he still knew how to listen to them, and old habits were harder to lose than old knowledge. He had walked into the maintenance bay that Tuesday morning, because the Huey's engine noise carried across the hangar in a way that reached him before he reached the bay. And what he heard in that noise was the specific incomplete spool of a T-53 with a fuel control issue that he had diagnosed 14 times in Vietnam and once in a Fort Rucker training bay in 1984, and was now hearing again for the 16th time in a Heritage Foundation hangar, from a helicopter that had been built the year before he deployed. He had put his hand in his jacket pocket and found the stethoscope. He always had it. Every day, every visit, every errand. 49 years of carrying it as automatically as other men carry their keys. Cutler had stood up from the cowling. He was looking at the old man with the stethoscope and the thermos with an expression that was trying to be patient and professional in equal measure. "Sir, I understand you may have experience with this airframe, but this is a controlled restoration environment, and we have protocols for fuel control unit," Doyle said. He had not moved. He was still looking at the engine. Specifically, the metering valve. It's not seating correctly on the low-speed stop. The turbine is spooling to approximately 68% before the control circuit tries to stabilize the fuel flow, and the valve position creates a flow interruption that drops it back. He looked at Cutler. "You're hearing it as a failed start. It's not a failed start. The engine is fine. The metering valve is sitting 2 to 3 thousandths proud on the low-speed stop." Cutler stared at him. "How can you tell that from?" he started. "The sound," Doyle said. "The frequency of the spool drops in a specific pattern when the metering valve is the issue. It's not in any diagnostic algorithm because the algorithm is listening for complete failure, not for the specific interruption pattern of a partially obstructed low-speed stop." He held up the stethoscope. "May I?" Cutler looked at the stethoscope. He looked at the engine. He looked at Tran, who looked back with an expression of complete neutrality that was doing a poor job of hiding the fact that Tran had noticed the old man listening from the hangar entrance and had thought, privately, that the old man's expression while listening was different from any expression Tran had seen on a person standing 60 feet from an aircraft. Cutler stepped back. "Go ahead," he said. Doyle walked to the engine cowling. He placed the stethoscope probe at 3 points on the fuel control housing. Not quickly, not performing the action, by just finding the positions that would give him the information he needed. He stood with his eyes closed for perhaps 15 seconds at each point. Then he straightened up. "Crank it," he said. Cutler looked at him. "We've cranked it 11 times, he said. "Crank it," Doyle said. "And when it gets to 68%, hold it there. Don't let it go further. I need to hear the metering valve at that power setting." Tran was already in the cockpit. Cutler had not told him to go. He had gone because everything about the last 4 minutes had told him to go. The starter engaged. The turbine began to spool, the familiar whine rising in pitch, and then the point at which it had always fallen back, 68%, and Tran held it. Doyle put the stethoscope to the fuel control housing. He listened for 11 seconds. He held up one hand, palm flat. "Hold." He moved the probe 2 centimeters. He listened for 4 more seconds. He lowered the stethoscope. "Shut it down," he said. The turbine wound down. The hangar went quiet in the specific way hangars go quiet after engine noise. The silence louder than it was before. Doyle looked at Cutler. "Low-speed stop adjustment screw," he said. "Left side of the metering valve housing recessed. You'll need a number 4 flat blade, the long one, because the access is tight. Back it out 1/4 turn counterclockwise. Just 1/4. Then crank it again." Cutler looked at the fuel control housing. He looked at the metering valve. He looked at the adjustment screw that Doyle had described. Recessed, left side, exactly where Doyle had said it would be. It was not in the restoration checklist. It was not flagged by the diagnostic tablet. It was a 1/4 turn adjustment on a screw that you would only know to look for if you had seen this failure before. He got the number 4 flat blade from the tool cart. It took him 40 seconds. Subscribe to Iron and Honor right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because when Tran cranks the engine after that 1/4 turn and the turbine spools cleanly through 68% and keeps going all the way to idle. For the first time in 2.5 hours, The sound that comes out of that engine is not just a helicopter starting. It is 55 years of a man knowing his machine, arriving at exactly the moment the machine needs him. The turbine spooled. It climbed through 68%. It did not fall back. It climbed to 72, 75, 80%, and then settled into idle, a clean, steady, correct idle, the sound the aircraft was supposed to make and had not made all morning. The rotor disc began to turn above the hangar. The sound filled the bay and bounced off the concrete walls and the high ceiling, and came back different than it had gone out, because it was the right sound now. And the right sound in a hangar does not echo the same way as the wrong one. Cutler was standing at the fuel control housing with the number 4 flat blade in his hand and his mouth slightly open. Tran, in the cockpit, turned and looked at the old man through the windscreen. His expression was the expression of a 22-year-old who has just watched something he does not yet have the framework to categorize, but will be thinking about for a long time. Doyle was looking at the engine, not at the gauges, not at the rotor, not at anyone in the bay, at the engine. His face was the face of a man listening to something he has known for 50 years say exactly what it was always supposed to say. He let it run for 45 seconds. Then he made a small motion to Tran, a flat hand, a slight downward press, and Tran brought it to shut down. The rotor slowed. The turbine wound down. The hangar went quiet again. Doyle capped the stethoscope and put it in his jacket pocket. Lieutenant Colonel Renata Flores had come in during the last 30 seconds of the run. She had heard the engine from the parking area, heard the difference in it, the right sound, and had walked quickly to the bay entrance. She had arrived in time to hear the idle and to watch Doyle make the shutdown signal to Tran. She stood at the bay entrance for a moment. Then she walked to Doyle Hester. She put out both hands. She shook his with both of hers, the specific handshake of someone who understands exactly what they are shaking, which is not just a hand, but the 55 years behind it. "Chief Hester," she said. Doyle looked at her. "Colonel," he said. She looked at the Huey, at the rotor, still moving slowly to a stop, at the olive-drab fuselage and the stenciled serial number on the tail boom, a number she knew, because she had read the aircraft's history when the Foundation had accepted the donation, and the history listed the aircraft's operational assignments and the crew chiefs who had maintained it in Vietnam. Doyle Hester's name was on that list. He had maintained this specific aircraft for 6 months in 1969. He was standing in a Fort Rucker hangar 55 years later, and he had just started it with a 1/4 turn on an adjustment screw that no diagnostic system had found, because he had heard the failure before and remembered where to look. She looked at him. "Did you know?" she said. "The tail number. Did you recognize it when you walked in?" Doyle looked at the aircraft. "I thought it might be," he said. "The dent on the skid cross tube, left side. I put that dent there in 1969 on a hard landing outside Pleiku." He looked at it for a moment. "I always meant to straighten it." Flores looked at the dent. She looked at the old man. She did not say anything for a moment. Some facts do not need a response. They need only to be received. Cutler found Doyle at his truck in the parking area after the debrief. The old man was leaning against the bed, thermos open, looking at nothing particular with the air of a man who has done a thing and is not thinking about the thing anymore, just standing in the morning. Cutler stopped in front of him. "Chief Hester," he said. He had looked up the rank after Flores had used it. Doyle looked at him. "The adjustment screw," Cutler said. "The 1/4 turn. That specific diagnosis from that specific sound. Is that in any documentation I can find?" Doyle thought about this. The T53 operator's manual mentions the metering valve adjustment, he said. It doesn't describe the sound it makes when the valve is off. That part you have to learn? How? By hearing it wrong enough times that you can hear when it's right, Doyle said. He took a sip of coffee. I heard it wrong the first 4 times in Vietnam. By the 5th time, I knew what I was listening for. By the 10th time, I could diagnose it from the hangar door. Cutler was quiet. I've been certified on the T53 for 4 years, he said. I know, Doyle said. You're good at what you know. The certification teaches you what to look for. The aircraft teaches you what to hear. He looked back at the hangar. They're different educations. You need both. The manual gets you to the right county. The hours get you to the right door. He capped the thermos. Come back Thursday, he said. I'll be here for the fuel system inspection. There are 3 other things on this aircraft I can show you that aren't in any document. He paused. Might as well learn them while someone who knows them is still here to show you. He got in the truck. Cutler stood in the parking area and watched the 2001 Dodge Ram back out of the space and turn toward the gate. He stood there for a moment after it left, in the Fort Rucker morning, with a number 4 flat blade still in his hand and the sound of a correctly idling T53 still in his ears. He thought about the diagnostic tablet in his cargo pocket. He thought about the 11 failed cranking attempts and the 2.5 hours and the algorithm that had been listening for complete failure instead of for the specific sound of partial failure in a particular component. He thought about the old man who had stood at the hangar entrance, not reading a tablet, not consulting a checklist, just listening. The way you listen when you have heard something so many times you can hear when it is wrong from 60 feet away. He went back inside. He opened a fresh page in the maintenance log and wrote, under additional notes, low-speed stop adjustment screw, metering valve, T53 1/4 CWW, diagnosed by sound, not on standard checklist. Consult CW4 Doyle Hester, retired, for full audio profile. He has offered to return Thursday. He did not know what else to write. He knew that whatever he wrote would not contain the main thing, which was the sound of the engine starting and the face of the old man listening to it run. The face of a man in conversation with a machine he has known for 55 years, hearing it say the right thing at last. He left the page and went back to work. There are men in this country who know the inside of an engine the way other men know a voice, who can hear across a hangar the difference between a machine that is running correctly and a machine that is about to fail in one specific way, because they have heard it fail that specific way before, years ago, somewhere else, under different sky. Doyle Hester has that knowledge in a mechanic's stethoscope he has carried in his pocket since 1969. The probe tip is smooth from 55 years of use. He carries it the way other men carry house keys, automatically, without thought, because it belongs with him and has for as long as he can remember. He was 19 years old the first time he diagnosed a metering valve fault by sound alone. He was 77 the 16th time. The aircraft did not care how old he was. It cared whether he could hear it. Subscribe to Iron and Honor for the men who still know how to listen. Hit the bell. Don't miss the next one. The diagnostic tablet was listening for failure. Doyle Hester was listening for something more specific than that. The 1/4 turn was not a guess. It was 55 years of paying attention, arriving at the right answer, before anyone else in the room knew the question.